Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Robin Hicks, your host for today. Thank you for joining us for the launch of Rimba Collective. Before we get cracking, some housekeeping rules. I believe all of you are muted on the call, but if you want to submit questions, please do via the chat box. You can submit questions you have at any time during today's event, and we will answer as many of these after the panel discussion a bit later on. We have about 20 minutes for the Q&A section, and we'll try our best to get through most of the questions. If we run out of time, the Lestari Capital team will be taking note of the questions and will reach out to you afterwards. Please make sure you include your name and organisation when submitting questions. Okay, let me take this opportunity now to introduce my co-host, Michael Roost, the founder and director of Lestari Capital. Michael has over 20 years of experience working in conservation, biodiversity and corporate sustainability in Asia, Africa, Europe and Latin America. Currently based in Indonesia, a considerable portion of his career has focused on forest conservation efforts in relation to the palm oil supply chain. At Lestari Capital, he heads up strategy for sustainable commodities and runs a team that comes up with innovative conservation finance mechanisms. I'll now hand over to Michael to introduce today's other speakers and the agenda. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Robin. Good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests. I'm incredibly proud to welcome you all to the launch of the Rimba Collective. Over a year ago, we came together to start working on a number of challenging questions. How can businesses go beyond their current sustainability commitments and deliver on a nature positive agenda? How can we better integrate conservation finance into business operations? How can we ensure that the impacts are credible, verifiable, scalable, and long-lasting? And how can we connect supply chains through shared responsibility? Now, I'm very pleased to be here today to present to you our work, the Rimba Collective, which is designed to address these questions. Firstly, though, I just want to run through the agenda of today. Please note that there is a live interpretation in both Bahasa Indonesia and in English. You can access this by clicking on the icon of the globe labeled interpretation at the bottom right-hand side of your screen and just select Bahasa Indonesia. Now, the Rimba Collective greatly appreciates the critical work that the government of Indonesia is doing focused on nature conservation, regenerative community livelihoods. And we aim to support the government's objectives and provide a flagship project for green investment aligned with conservation. Unfortunately, as I think you saw in the invitation, our keynote speaker, Ibu Nani Hendriati, who is the Deputy for Environment and Forestry Management Coordinating Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Investment in Indonesia, was to join us, as was Pak Ruanda Agung Sugardiman, who was supposed to be our closing speaker, who's the Director General of Climate Change of the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. They were both to speak today, but unfortunately been called out on urgent ministerial business and cannot attend. But they both have sent their good wishes for our event and look forward to working with us in the near future. So I will, first of all, present to you the Rimba Collective and the underlying mechanism. We will then follow this up by a panel discussion that will be moderated by Robin Hicks. We're delighted to actually have some of our founding and development partners, as well as a project partner, join us today. And on the panel, we will have Emily Kuhnen, who's the Global Responsible Sourcing Leader for Palm Oil and Seafood at Nestle, Lily Yip, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer for Pepsico in APAC, Pak Immanuel Huda, who's the Director of PRCF in Indonesia, Perpetua George, the General Manager for Group Sustainability in Wilmar. Now, we will follow that panel discussion with an open Q&A session, as Robin has already mentioned. I'm also very honored to welcome Pat Rizal, the Southeast Asia Regional Director for the Tropical Forest Alliance, who will kindly provide our closing remarks to the event, and I will introduce him a little bit later. So first of all, what I would like to do is really to introduce to you the Rimba Collective. Now, the need for conservation and restoration of our natural environment is more evident every single day, but the efforts to protect and restore nature, as well as increase community livelihoods and resilience, are still undervalued and chronically underfunded. Even in the 21st century, this work continues to be viewed as charitable, CSR-focused, philanthropic, rather than as a necessity that is integrated into business as usual, and this has to change. But we are now seeing a profound shift in how businesses view nature and the critical place that conservation and restoration actually have in sustainability commitments. We're beginning to see commitments that focus on more than simply avoiding and minimizing impact, but also on the proactive conservation of intact ecosystems and the restoration of damaged ones. We're also seeing private sector leadership in pursuit of nature positive supply chains and the sustainable development goals that include support for local communities and land rights. Now, these commitments are good for the planet, they're good for the local communities, but they're also very good for the businesses that participate. And the commitments are shifting from a reactive to a proactive orientation. And that is a process that will facilitate future success of these commitments. And one missing piece in this process has been a mechanism that can change how businesses can collaborate, can support, and ultimately deliver on the commitments with regards to large-scale conservation and restoration efforts on the ground. Projects delivering real impact continue to be grant dependent, despite the growing market demand for the outcomes that they are producing. And to date, we have not had a mechanism that translates this progressive leadership on these issues into action. And so this is why I'm incredibly excited to present to you today the Rimba Collective. The Rimba Collective was initiated by a group of corporate leaders in sustainability, Nestle, Pepsico, Procter & Gamble, Wilmar, together with Lastari Capital, and seeking to make a positive impact on ecosystems, on biodiversity, and on people into the future. Now, early last year, we came together to conceptualize what form a groundbreaking, innovative mechanism could take. Now, we've been on an incredible journey, and we'll work through many challenging questions that basically led us to this day when we launched this mechanism and the Rimba Collective itself. Now, I just do want to also put a special mention into the UK Aid and the Partnerships for Forest Programme, who provided that initial phase 1 financing that supported the initiation of this work. So firstly, what is the Rimba Collective? Well, the Rimba Collective is the first of its kind, private sector-led mechanism that allows for equitable sharing of responsibility and collective action between and within supply chain tiers. It links the magnitude of conservation payments to the production and usage of palm oil products. The Rimba Collective is basically defined by an underlying mechanism through which the entire supply chain of the palm oil industry can finance conservation collectively and deliver on their sustainability commitments by enabling verified conservation outcomes on the ground. At the heart of the Rimba Collective is a portfolio of high quality independent projects focused on community forests and larger scale ecosystem initiatives. This portfolio is open to all qualifying projects, both inside and outside the supply chain, and focus on local and regional conservation needs, including forest conservation, restoration, peatlands, biodiversity protection, and securing and improving community livelihoods. Now, the Rimba Collective is not designed to replace existing commitments at avoiding and minimizing the impact of commodity production. It's being developed to complement these efforts by providing the platform for achieving critical and verifiable sustainability outcomes and for nurturing a forward-looking positive commitment that supports nature conservation into the future. So why is the Rimba Collective different? Well, the first thing is that the Rimba Collective is, as its cornerstone, led by impact. And that's starting with a goal of 500,000 hectares of conservation area protected and financed for 25 years. Now, this represents about $1 billion of conservation finance, making it one of the largest private sector-led conservation initiatives in Southeast Asia. But we see that even more can be achieved with innovative approaches to project pipeline development with partners, and the momentum that we're generating with progressive forward-looking businesses is already making us look further and more ambitiously into the future. And the Rimba Collective is about scale of impact. It's built for all parts of the supply chain. It allows for cooperation to achieve that collective impact, where individual efforts would unlikely be sufficient to make a difference. And importantly, the Rimba Collective aims to achieve a number of sustainability commitments at different levels of the supply chain. Now, these include progress towards the achievement, recovery, and maintenance of no deforestation, no peat, no exploitation commitments, supporting of the Forest Positive Coalition of Action Goals, SDGs, carbon and climate neutrality targets, and net zero, as well as science-based targets once they are fully developed, as well as the New York Declaration on Forests. Now, in addition, by prioritizing projects in high deforestation risk areas impacted by commodity production, the Rimba Collective proactively seeks to secure NDPE commitments into the future, aiming to prevent deforestation in the first place. Now, conservation and livelihood outcomes are really the Rimba Collective's main focus. The projects are supported through performance-based payments, and the outcomes are verified by independent third parties, applying global conservation standards, including Plan Vivo, Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Standard, and the Verified Carbon Standard. The claims of the companies within the Rimba Collective are tied to those outcomes that are being generated verifiably by the projects. The Rimba Collective seeks to end project dependency on short-term donor financing, replacing this instead with long-term market and performance-based support. Longevity is a key tenet, providing that 25 years of financing to projects that I mentioned. Now, integrating these efforts into business as usual is another principle of the Rimba Collective. Conservation and restoration activities can no longer be financed with CSR, sustainability, or communications budgets. In order to scale conservation efforts, financing has to be connected to procurement. The Rimba Collective creates a mechanism for doing this equitably, sharing responsibility amongst companies and linking their contributions to the usage of palm oil products. The Rimba Collective also utilizes a portfolio approach to supporting projects. Now, this allows companies to access a wide variety of conservation outcomes, and it also supports a wide range of projects as a result. In addition, that portfolio approach also allows us to drive conservation projects through the early development stages, de-risking that project setup stage as well. And importantly, the Rimba Collective does not set a price for conservation. Instead, the projects that are approved receive the financing that they require to generate the outcomes and the impact that they set out to achieve. So how does it work? Well, we're beginning with two supply chain tiers, the processors and traders and consumer goods manufacturers. Now, by the end of 2021, we also hope that the usership will extend to growers seeking to fulfill NDP recovery requirements and retailers aiming to fulfill their sustainability and shared responsibility commitments. At the project level, the Rimba Collective has identified over 500,000 hectares of conservation projects, starting in Indonesia and later expanding to broader Southeast Asia. Now, entry into that portfolio is open to all projects that fulfill the project criteria that pass an independent due diligence process. The process also works closely with the projects to identify the key performance outcomes and budgetary requirements, and these are all agreed with the projects themselves. The project portfolio is going to commence its first round of project support at approximately 200,000 hectares and will build up over time, reaching its target of 500,000 by 2024. However, I should say that we're already being asked whether the project portfolio can expand more and can expand more quickly. So this is a very good problem to have. Now, at the center of the Rimba Collective is a special purpose vehicle, which is designed to raise, manage, and distribute financing for conservation. The contributions to the SPV are determined by a company's supply chain tier and the magnitude of its participation in the sector, and this serves to promote equitability and collective effort. An independent governance process oversees all aspects of the mechanism, from ensuring that contributing members fulfill the entry requirements to also ensuring that the projects deliver upon the agreed outcomes. The project portfolio of projects generate a number of verifiable claims linked to, for example, hectares of forest protected or restored, biodiversity, livelihood outcomes, and climate benefits. Now, the companies participating in the Rimba Collective makes its claims on the verified and demonstrated outcomes commensurate with their contributions to the project portfolio. Now, should a company wish or need to expand the scale of its claims, for example, the hectares of conservation it supports in order to comply with a specific commitment, it can actually do that by increasing its contribution and expanding the overall portfolio supported. And new companies entering the Rimba Collective will initially make claims commensurate to their contribution within the initial 500,000 hectares. However, the real impact in more companies joining the Rimba Collective will be the expansion of the portfolio, and that makes the model truly scalable. And this is why we want more companies to join us. So what will the Rimba Collective achieve? Well, it's truly innovative on several fronts. It sets a new benchmark for shared responsibility and for collective action for conservation and restoration. It integrates conservation and restoration into business as usual, for the first time working towards the goal of integrating conservation into the cost of goods. It changes the narrative on how conservation is financed and offers accountability through verifiable and demonstrable claims and delivery of impacts. It puts also, for the first time, a scalable model that starts ambitiously and aims for an even greater impact, an impact that is replicable in other geographies and other commodities. It also allows stakeholders to see on-the-ground impact and achievement of sustainability commitments through transparent monitoring and reporting. And of course, it supports national governments' goals, aiming to seek a greater balance between production and protection, clearly demonstrating that conservation has a value and can be sustainably supported over the long term. Now, for the next steps, we've come a really long way and achieved a great deal as we introduced to you the Rimba Collective today. Scope 1 was aimed at developing the initial idea where the founding of the development partners came together. Phase 2 designed and built out the concept, the main operational mechanisms, the financial structure, the claims framework, and identified the project portfolio. The Phase 3, in which we are now, which we're introducing to you today, will by November 2021 will have onboarded the initial project portfolio of 200,000 hectares. It will have finalized all the mechanism structures and supporting frameworks. It would have established the legal, the governance, and the financial vehicle, and would have created the claims monitoring and reporting frameworks. And our ultimate aim is that the first payments to the projects start before the end of this year in December. But this is only the beginning. The applicability of the Rimba Collective to other commodities and other geographies is already very clear, and we're very keen to work with you in making that a reality. And so I come, I guess, to my last slide, because we see so many opportunities ahead for the Rimba Collective to achieve a positive impact and to become a leader in addressing key challenges in conservation and sustainability. But we can do so much more in collaboration with others. We're seeking new and innovative ways to expand the project portfolio beyond the 500,000 hectares and to make the portfolio even stronger. So if you're a local community with a village forest, an NGO leading a restoration initiative, or a project proponent of any sort, we want to hear from you. We're exploring ways to identify and deliver project development support to new or developing projects so that we can increase the number of projects on the ground. So if you're a donor and you're seeking to create innovative blended finance models for conservation, then we also want to hear from you. If you're a local government authority in a jurisdiction that seeks to facilitate and support local community stewardship and entrepreneurial approaches to forest conservation, we also want to hear from you. And we deal with many challenges and really exciting questions on how to improve our thinking, how to make the Rimba Collective more robust and more impactful. So if you're a stakeholder, you're a technical expert, you're a researcher interested in these goals, then we want to hear from you. And of course, the name says it all. If you're a progressive company seeking to find innovative ways to deliver robustly and proactively on your sustainability commitments, then we want you to join us. So thank you. And I would now like to just hand over back to Robin, who will take us through the panel session.
Thank you, Michael. Such an interesting concept and a real game changer, moving, as you said, from a reactive to a proactive approach to forest conservation. So it's great to be here among our guests and such an impressive lineup on the panel today. So what we'll do is we'll go around the group with a number of questions, and after that we'll open up to the floor for a Q&A with you, our audience. So do put any questions you have in the chat box, and please remember to include your full name and your organisation as well as your designation so we know who you are. So now to kick things off, with a question first for Emily Coonan, Global Responsible Sourcing Leader, Palm Oil and Seafood for Nestlé. Emily, sorry to pick on you first, but why have you chosen to participate in and be a founding member of Rimba Collective?
Sure. Hi, Robin. It's really great to be here and exciting to see this initiative finally launching. To explain why Nestle chose to be part of the development of this initiative, we really need to go back to our no deforestation commitment that was made in 2010. So Nestle, like many companies, committed to no deforestation in 2010. And so since then, for the past decade, we've been really progressing and addressing deforestation in our supply chains. This has been done through focusing on mapping our supply chains and then using a suite of different tools to ensure the commodities we buy are not coming from areas that are deforested. For example, we're using satellite monitoring, certification systems, on-the-ground assessments, smallholder engagement, et cetera, et cetera. However, if there's one really critical thing that we learned through this work for the past decade, it's that really to truly protect the forests over the long term, we can't just be looking through this no deforestation lens alone. We need to also be looking at active conservation and restoration measures. We've seen firsthand, I think particularly through our satellite monitoring systems, the drivers of deforestation and how complex and dynamic they are. And through that, really seen that we need to take a proactive, very long-term strategy that allows for assessing and addressing that future risk of deforestation before it occurs. That means that companies in the supply chain really have to engage in conservation, reforestation, restoration activities, as well as initiatives that address livelihoods and human rights for those who are living near the forest frontiers. So last year in 2020, as we were really taking stock of those lessons, we realized that we needed to make that transition that Mike was talking about from kind of a no deforestation strategy to a forest positive strategy. And part of what that forest positive strategy means is that we need to integrate proactive conservation and restoration measures very systematically into the way that supply chains operate. Now, the idea of investing in conservation and restoration, that alone isn't new. I think the companies that were among the founding partners here have all been working on these initiatives for a long time. But what is new, what is game changing, I think, is that having the development of a mechanism that really enables the actors across the full tiers of the supply chain to come together and work collectively at an industry level to deliver those actions at a large scale and in a way that is financially viable for the long run. So that's really why we decided to be a part of the development of the Rimba Collective, really to build a systematic and sustainable mechanism that allows for long-term conservation and restoration in production landscapes around supply chains that we source from. And I think what's really exciting is that the mechanism that Mike just described is really doing that by sharing the cost and responsibility across the whole value chain, by investing in projects, decades-long projects within palm oil producing landscapes, and also by providing a model that's scalable to other geographies and commodities in the future. So I think through this, we really have the opportunity to galvanize collective action to make forest conservation and restoration a reality in production landscapes. And I think as we're all aware, this is really needed more than ever right now because the scale of action is just so big. It's not something one company can do alone. It's not something we're going to achieve by every company doing it individually in isolation. So by working together as an industry rather than on our own, that's how we're going to reach the significant impact we need to get to in terms of the areas conserved and restored, the long-term protection of forests, and the integration of these actions as part of the way that business is done. So we're really hopeful that this mechanism can grow with new companies joining, with the scale of the portfolio growing to the point where investing in conservation and restoration is really just the way the norm of how sourcing ingredients works.
Yeah, amazing point that you make there on scale. It's great to see the panel with yourselves, Nestle, John with Pepsico and Procter & Gamble. It'd be great to see more join the Rimba Collective. So next question I'd like to ask Lily Yip, who's Chief Sustainability Officer for PepsiCo Asia Pacific. Hi, Lily. So I'd like to ask you what, in your view, sets Rimba Collective apart from your perspective?
First of all, I'm really happy to be here. Good afternoon, everybody. So Pepsico has a very long-term commitment on sustainability. We're very excited to have Rimba as a partner on this journey. To your question, what sets Rimba Collective apart from other players? In our view, Rimba Collective is a unique partner for many reasons. First of all, it has an applicability beyond palm oil and into other commodities in other countries. This can be very helpful for PepsiCo in the long term when we consider other forest footprint commodities such as paper, cocoa, and soil. We can take the same approach. Secondly, it brings together the full supply chain to work collectively to share costs and create shared responsibility for conservation and restoration. This is something that we have supported across industry efforts, including our partnership with RSPO. And then also, we see that this program supports effective coordination and the professional management of restoration and conservation. It creates a systematic approach to implement rather than piecemeal efforts by the individual companies. And this is really important as we work towards concerted action on critical issues such as deforestation and climate change. Talking about climate change, as you know that PepsiCo recently stepped up our climate commitment. To achieve the goals, we need everyone to work together in a coordinated and effective manner. And last but not least, I think this initiative also demonstrates a model that it shows how commodities can be developed sustainably to the benefit of local people and in partnership with local communities and governments. The ambition of this program in terms of its scale and the connection to the local markets are key factors that are differentiated from the rest of the projects.
Good stuff. Thanks very much for that, Lily. Really interesting to hear about PepsiCo's contribution. So so next question I'd like to turn to you, Perpetua George, General Manager for Group Sustainability for Wilmar International, a large palm oil grower. Welcome, Pep.
Hi, Robin. Just to correct you, not so much a big grower, but we're a big trader.
I'm sorry, huge apologies. Sorry about that. I stand corrected. So a big palm oil trader. Now, if you could tell us a bit about the considerations you have made in designing the mechanism for Rimba Collective.
Yeah, I think the main point that really makes this whole process and this initiative revolutionary, and I don't use that word lightly, is very much this idea of switching up really effective projects, especially on conservation and forest positive projects that are really long lasting. So we're looking at really changing up the culture of many conservation programs that are very much, historically and even now, really based on short-term funding cycles. And so the idea here being that if projects on the ground have the ability to plan ahead for 25 years, you're really looking at the ability to build, quite a revolutionary legacy, up to 500,000 hectares, again, of forest protected within the period, but also potentially touching 32,000 people supported as part of the process. So, it's a really big, effectively, thing that we're putting money into. And, it really does change up, I think, the rhetoric around how companies, and particularly, I think we're looking at the palm industry first years, how we in the industry are addressing issues to do with deforestation. So it is also about spreading the responsibility. So really sharing up that responsibility in terms of, who it is that's paying for these ecosystem services in a way. It's not just really looking at ensuring only upstream, for example, is sort of paying for what has happened in the past, but really we're looking at a forest positive solution. And again, I think keywords here, legacy, keywords here also really about long-term, not just commitment, but also ensuring that these the projects are able to perform and really, putting in place KPIs, but looking at, based on science-based targets processes, but the VCS process as well, to ensure that you have projects on the ground that will be regularly assessed to ensure that that 25-year tenure is going to be possible. So yeah, these were sort of the elements that we pulled together, I think, as part of the development of this, because, you know, when you're looking at the ask of what companies would do to contribute to sort of a forest positive future, it really has to be really tangible. And it's not tangible to be looking at, you know, one-off funding here and there for small projects for, you know, small duration of periods, right? You really need to look at that whole legacy, you know, 500,000 hectares, 25 years, it's immense. And it's something we're really excited to really try and push out.
Excellent. Yeah, no, really interesting to hear the words longevity, as you mentioned, but also performance and measuring the performance of these projects. Really exciting. So next question I'd like to ask is about impact, actually. I'd like to introduce Pak Immanuel Huda, who's Director of PRCF Indonesia. So Pak Immanuel, welcome. I'd like to ask you, Pak, about the anticipated impacts of Rimba Collective you're most excited about.
Okay, thank you, William. People Resource and Conservation Foundation Indonesia is a non-profit organization that work in the field of biodiversity conservation and empowerment of people or indigenous people living in around the forest. Currently, we are doing activities in rainforest landscape in Kapuas Hulu district, West Kalimantan province. This district has 1.7 million hectare of forest, or 56 consisting of conservation and protection forest area. So that in 2015, this district declared itself a conservation district, where in and around the forest, there are 70 villages that depend on their livelihood. By 2020, 154 hectares of forest had been handed over by the state to the community to be managed for 35 years through various forest management scheme in the social forestry program. The biggest challenge for the community in the forest management for 35 years is the limited funds to support sustainable forest management, which can have an impact on the increasing community capacity, biodiversity, livelihood, and maintenance of the climatic factor. In 2021, PRCF Indonesia, facilitated by Lestari Capital, will implement Rimba Collective program covering 10,000 hectares for the 5 village forests. This program will be developed with other partners of PRCF Indonesia in Kapuas Hulu district. For the next phase, covering area for 29,000 hectares and 38,000 hectares. So it's expected that there are 77 hectares of village forest in 15 villages that will benefit from the Rimba Collective program. The main activity that will be facilitated in this program are strengthening the institutional and capacity of the village forest management institution and the community, forest protection and rehabilitation, development of community livelihood, supporting the development of education and culture. Long-term financial support through the Rimba Collective program is the best strategy in supporting community empowerment effort in sustainable forest management. This support is expected to bring about change in biodiversity conservation, change the way of the thinking and acting, development of productive business that support increase the community income and reduce emission due to the reduced deforestation and forest degradation. To all parties who have been involved in the Rimba Collective program to conserve forests and empower community, we would like to thank you.
Thank you so much, Pak Immanuel. So exciting to hear about the impact in real hectareage of land. Great to hear that. Thank you so much. Same question about impact for Dr. Henry Sitorus, who's head of project outreach at the Lestari Capital. Welcome, Pak, and can you tell us about the anticipated impacts of Rimba Collective you're most excited about?
Okay, thank you, Pak Robin. So very glad to share with you. I'm Henry Sitorus. I'm working with Lestari Capital as part of the project team. So the project team, of course, in collaboration with our project partners, we will implement Rimba Collective to achieve sustainable impact in collaboration with our project partners. PRCF, who just shared about their potential project, is one of our potential project proponent, including others. Multi-projects we design systematically to achieve variety of conservation outcome and of course sustainability. So the impact, as we can categorize, is firstly is on the improvement of forest governance. This will also include the enhanced capacity of forest management units, such as the LPHD. The LPHD is a village forest management unit, because to some extent their capacity still need to be supported. So this project will improve their capacity. Secondly, the impact will be prevention of deforestation and reduced rate of forest degradation. This will be done by boundary marking, forest area, also, of course, is also forest patrol. Thirdly is the reforestation and forest rehabilitation, and through various activities that, of course, this will achieve also protection of biodiversity. Similarly, the project will also improve community livelihood, because this one of the threats is for deforestation is the poverty, which somehow can be reached to the forest. So this will also increase the opportunity for sustainable livelihood among the community members. The span of the project will also cover peatland forest and mangrove restoration or rehabilitation. So in Indonesia, the areas will be in Kalimantan, Sumatra, and other potential islands. The permits, of course, in collaboration with the government issued permits, such as social forestry and ecosystem restoration concession. So PRCF, which just previously briefed about the projects, is one of our project partners working in West Kalimantan. Other project partners also working in other areas. So thank you.
Terima kasih. Thank you, Pat. Yeah, really interesting to hear you talk about sustainable livelihoods, which are so critical to making conservation projects work on the ground, right? So back to you, Michael's Rust, a question for you, Lestari Capital founder. So you mentioned in your talk about you issued a call for NGOs to get in touch who are running conservation projects. My question for you, Michael, is for NGOs that could be eligible for the fund, which is, I think the figure is about $1 billion. What are the mechanisms in place for finding and selecting forest restoration and conservation projects?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's very important to say that we're interested in both conservation, protection, and restoration projects, and projects especially which include community livelihood support activities, which are kind of fundamental. You know, if conservation activities in general are to be successful, we are also very much interested in projects which are linked to production areas, which are geographically close to production areas, of course, where there is a relatively higher threat to the forests themselves from those production areas. And we've done an incredible amount of work to identify the initial project portfolio. But it is important to reiterate, as I said in my presentation, that the portfolio is open to any projects that fulfill the criteria. You know, because we are really about the performance-based payments, and we are about the long-term impacts, and these are the key tenets of the Rimba Collective. Each project will have to undergo a robust and independent due diligence process, but we will be supporting the projects through this. We also hope to work with donors and project development communities so that where the projects are not quite ready yet, that we can provide targeted support to raise them and really get them over the line to be able to pass that due diligence process. So as part of the next phase, we're going to be launching a public space through which interested projects can actually apply, but where the project criteria and then the entire process will be detailed. So please look out for that. But if you are interested in becoming part of that project portfolio, then please do get in touch with us. We have contact details at the end of this as well. You know, and as Pak Henry has just said, you know, we are looking at projects which do have that sort of longevity built in. So we are looking at projects which are licensed currently as either community forests or hutan desas, traditional community forests or hutan adats, or the ecosystem restoration concessions. But some of these projects might not yet have the licenses, or might have the licenses but are not yet operational. But we do still want to hear from those types of projects because we do feel that there is a really significant opportunity here to work very, very collaboratively with the donor community on taking those projects and supporting them through that development, especially when there is an opportunity to then enter the project portfolio, not be dependent on grant financing over the project lifetime, and have the operational funding that is required be provided by a mechanism such as the Rimba Collective.
Good stuff, thanks, Michael. So before one final question for the panel, just a reminder to our audience that if you've got any questions, do pop them in the chat box. And again, please do leave your designation, your job title and your organization. We'll try our best to answer as many of the questions as you can. So yeah, one more question for you, Michael. Now, you sort of touched on this in your presentation, but I think it's so important it's worth asking again, right? How will Rimba Collective work to ensure restoration and conservation work is effective and permanent? How will you make sure that it's long lasting?
Yeah, I will maybe add a little bit to my previous answer. Maybe answer this in two parts. I think the first part of this as an answer is really thinking about tomorrow and the next year and then the next few years. So how do we ensure that the projects that are already entering the project portfolio are successful? So as I mentioned, the projects will undergo a due diligence process. There will be an annual monitoring and reporting process. We will use independent evaluators to look at the projects. We will work with the projects to actually help them set the appropriate KPIs and also help with, you know, very straightforward things sometimes that the projects actually do need help with, like developing long-term budgets. You know, it's a very telling issue when you understand that a lot of the projects don't even have 25-year budgets, you know, because they're not able to think in those kinds of timescales. And so we work with these projects to do that. In many cases, the problem is that the projects don't ask for enough financing to then be actually be able to deliver those outcomes. So the due diligence also works with them to make sure that there is enough financing to deliver those outcomes. You know, and then the second part, the second fundamental cornerstone of that is, of course, this kind of longevity, you know, working with those legal entities, as I mentioned, which are already recognized by the government, which already have the licenses in place, the clear land tenure in place. And in the case of Indonesia, these licenses are issued between 35 and 90 years. And so that longevity is built in, although the financial support isn't. I mean, I think for me, and sort of, excuse me if I get a little bit animated because of this, you know, one of the most sort of exciting pieces of, I think, what we're doing is really about the long-term impact that I would like to see. You know, fundamentally, what I hope that the Rimba Collective achieves is that we change that narrative and truly change it with real impact on the ground around how conservation is actually funded and how the value of conservation is actually being perceived. Because when we start to move away from sort of when we start to move towards the market-linked long-term thinking, when we move away from conservation being an afterthought, but it's something that we integrate into operations and into something that we do as a species, you know, then we start to open up a real world of possibilities about how we can actually scale up impact, what we can do with that sort of mentality in place, you know. And if we can start to demonstrate that there are actually alternative models of development, because conservation and restoration is actually financially sustainable and no longer dependent on handouts, you know, when we achieve that, then conservation suddenly becomes a viable alternative to extractive activities, and something that can be clearly integrated into sustainable landscapes and green investment models. And that really then starts to change the narrative. So really through this, I hope that we're able to demonstrate that conservation can stand on its own 2 feet as an alternative. It provides a diversification of income to local communities. And it also shows that there is an option on alternative development trajectories. And once we're able to change that trajectory and that mindset, I think mechanisms like the Rimba Collective can start to have a real long-term impact that sort of reverberates across different commodities and really starts to, work conservation into long-term landscape level planning.
Really interesting point around changing the narrative around conservation. Thanks so much, Michael Zruis from Lestari Capital. So we move on now to our Q&A section. Now, I've already had some really good questions actually coming in from your audience. So do keep submitting them to us if you can. Again, do remember to leave your designation and your organization with your question, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So thank you very much for a great panel discussion. Dr. Henry Sartorius from Lestari, Michael, Emily from Pepsi, Emily from Nestle, Lily from Pepsi, Pak Imanol from PRCF Indonesia, and of course, Perpetua George from Wilmar. So yes, now our Q&A section. And again, do send any questions you have to us. So I've got a first question. It's come from Marcus Colchester, who's Senior Policy Advisor from Forest Peoples Programme. It does some great work around the people who live in and around forests. So question, let's have a look. Question for Mike. Yeah, so how will the verification of project performance be done to retain credibility? First, nice, easy question for you, Michael. To
well, I mean, maybe just and excuse me if I'm repeating some of the things that I've already said, but it is a real key tenet of what we're trying to do, because as I mentioned in the presentation, the claims that are being made on the outcomes have to be demonstrable, have to be verifiable. And those are really the things that the companies participating in the Rimba Collective are basing their kind of claims on. So these real outcomes that are being generated by the activities that are being done on the ground. And so as it stands, of course, we will be undertaking the initial sort of due diligence to make sure that the projects are robust and are long-lasting, are additional as well, are equitable too, which I'm sure is of a specific interest to Marcus. Most of the projects that we have within the initial project portfolio scoping, all of them include some level of community work. In many cases, such as the project that PRCF supports in Kapuas Hulu. Actually, this is a village forest, and it has the livelihood aspect of it is very, very much so integrated into what the project does. There will be independent monitoring and reporting that will take place. We will be using independent auditors or evaluators to actually verify that the outcomes that are then within the KPIs are being generated by the projects. And those evaluators will be working under one of the sort of internationally, globally recognized conservation standards, as I mentioned, Plan Vivo, which is most often utilized in community forest areas, the CCBS, the Community Climate Conservation Standard, and the VCS for the larger projects that might be under the ecosystem restoration concessions. And this is going to be, these are all, as I said, are going to be independently audited. We will have a publicly available monitoring and reporting public-facing page where actually these impacts will be reported on as well. And there will be a satellite monitoring component to that And we're very excited actually to start working with some people on exactly what that framework will look like. But we will be developing, and we will be finalizing that monitoring and reporting framework over the course of this year.
Okay, another question back at you, Michael. It's from Faisal Parish from Global Environment Centre. So Faisal asks, can you tell us about the status of the project portfolio? Do you already have the projects identified, or will you start looking? Will you be starting to look for them?
Mm-hmm. So we've done really an immense amount of work. Lestari Capital has been looking at identifying projects within Indonesia for the last 5 years. There are some projects which we know which we would like to have as initial projects that will come through these kind of wave sort of level of onboarding. We perceive that there will be 3 waves that we will onboard the projects into the portfolio. As I said, starting this year, the initial projects we have effectively identified, and we will be undertaking the due diligence process on them this year. However, we are interested in other projects. We do have a demand effectively over that 500,000 hectares. And so if there are opportunities to expand that project portfolio, both in terms of temporal expansion more quickly, but in terms of also typological expansion more quickly, we would definitely like to see projects that are more and closely related to supply shaded areas. Then certainly we do want to hear from these projects, and we are very much interested in seeing how we can work with them to integrate them into the project portfolio sooner rather than later.
Okay, now a question for you, Pak Immanuel Huda from PRCF Indonesia. So this is a question from Patrick Anderson, from the Forest Peoples Programme. He wants to know, does the Rimba Collective seek to partner with Indigenous peoples to support their management of the forests? Good question.
Yep, our project in Kapas Hulu, this people or indigenous people have have the legal aspect to manage the forest in Kapas Hulu. We work together in some hutan desa to manage this program for a long time. So this program supports the management plan of to implement some activity in the hutan desa. Also, the next maybe some hutan adat can involve, but until now just some hutan desa join with us.
Right, thank you for that. Interesting, Pak Immanuel. Another question for you, back to you, Michael Zeroost. Ginny Ung, I'm not sure of the designation or organization. She asks, are all the projects, Michael, in Indonesia, the premise of obviously of Rimba Collectives that can expand into other countries outside of Indonesia eventually? So she asks, yeah, are they all in Indonesia at the moment? And yeah, plans to expand to other countries?
Yes, I can, if you don't mind, Robin, I would also maybe just like to add a little bit, I think, to Patrick's question with regards to the partnerships with the indigenous communities. Sure. It's very important to us, as I mentioned, that equitable aspect of the project is there. You know, the not only collaboration, but the integration of local indigenous communities within these projects is really fundamental for the project to achieve the conservation outcomes. And as I mentioned, two of the project typologies, the hutan desas and the hutan adats, are specifically focused on communities. So this is a very much an integrated part of that, and projects such as Pak Immanuel's under PRCF really demonstrates that very well about how that can function. And there are more project examples of that as well. To answer Ginny's question, excuse me, are all the projects in Indonesia? Well, we're starting with Indonesia. We are looking at expansion already, however, specifically into Malaysia and to potentially into Papua New Guinea. We have quite a lot of interest and quite a lot of scoping has already been conducted for projects which are on Peninsula and Bornean Malaysia in Sabah and Sarawak as well. So absolutely, under this, in the initial project portfolio, we are interested in expanding to those 2 other countries as well, and we are looking at ways of doing that. Indonesia, in many ways, is quite different from the standpoint of the licensed areas that I mentioned, and the fact that these hutan desa, hutan adat, and ecosystem restoration areas are additional to the protected area network. Now, we need to make sure that we maintain that kind of robustness when we start to look at projects elsewhere in terms of that additionality criteria. And so that's really one of our key things that we're making sure that we're abiding by. But certainly very, very interested in expanding outside of Indonesia. And of course, if we start to look at other commodities, whether we're talking about beef or soy or cocoa or coffee, then we will of course need to also expand to other geographic areas.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Another question back to you from Anjita Paramesti, who asks, how will the Rimba Collective plan to collaborate and complement other existing financial mechanisms for conservation? Michael?
Mm-hmm. I think we're definitely working with a couple of organizations in discussions, a couple of potential organizations that are looking at providing various financial services, or I would say services or financial mechanisms that can align and work alongside something like the Rimba Collective. I mean, certainly in terms of donors, I think there is a very clear case that we can collaborate in terms of the project setup and increasing the availability and the robustness of those kind of early stage projects. And we're talking with a number of donors on how to do that. There's a lot of excitement around that because it really just helps to fulfill everybody's KPIs. The second aspect of it is that we are also identifying organizations that seek to invest into projects, into new project development. And of course, there are opportunities in seeing how we can do that in order, again, to kind of scale up that sort of financial, that sort of financial provision to new projects. And this could be for projects, for example, where currently the licenses might be stranded assets, for example. We could turn those into something like conservation assets instead of an exploitation extraction asset. And so there again, lots of really exciting opportunities that we're exploring at the moment. And there are, of course, numerous financial services available really to areas where there are, for example, smallholders. So the areas which are on the forest frontiers, where there is financial provision or financial support being given to small scale growers. But usually that finance works alongside, is really just focused on those production areas, not necessarily on those protection areas. And something like the Rimba Collective, which is focused on the protection side of that, can work alongside the financing that's going into the production areas, which helps to support sustainable production in smallholder areas. And we would be seeking to align with that, seeking to support those protection aspects of it, which is actually ensuring that further deforestation doesn't happen in areas where deforestation is of greatest risk at the moment. Lots of different opportunities, very, very keen to explore that with all of you.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Michael. Now a question I'd like to ask Lily from Pepsi, or in fact Emily from Nestle, about how Rimba Collective will work alongside your no deforestation targets. Perhaps Emily, you'd like to take that one? Is there something you can add on that?
Sure, happy to start. So it's very much complementary. We fully remain committed to achieving our no deforestation commitment. So at the end of 2020, we had assessed over 90% of our key forest risk commodities as deforestation free. We're continuing to work through those tools to get to 100% by the end of next year. But at the same time, based on the work that we've been doing for the past decade to get there, we've seen that our strategy has to evolve beyond strictly just looking at that no deforestation component to also address the need for the long-term conservation and restoration of forests. So we really view the initiative as complementary. We're taking a landscape approach to our forest positive strategy and really looking at the production landscapes where we source from and ensuring that those production areas that Mike was talking about are not from deforested areas, and that we're also investing in those protection areas, such as through mechanisms like this.
Great stuff. So we've just about reached the, thank you so much for your contribution. Thank you very much, all of the panelists, for joining us for a really interesting and insightful discussion. Again, we can tackle any other questions you, the audience, may have later on, but I'd like to pass back to Michael Sroos from Lestari Capital with our thanks.
Thank you very much, Robin. And yes, I can see there are many questions, and so please feel free to reach out to us and send them to us directly. We will be going through the questions after this as well, and making sure that we reach out to you. So now it is my real pleasure to actually introduce you to our closing speaker, Pak Rizal Algamar, who is the Southeast Asia Regional Director for the Tropical Forest Alliance. Pak Rizal is also the ex-Indonesia Country Director for the Nature Conservancy. Pak, thank you very much for joining us, and I would please ask you to share with us a couple of your thoughts.
Thank you, Michael. So I'd like to begin by quoting the Economics of Biodiversity from the Dasgupta Review. Our economies, livelihood, and well-being all depend on our most precious asset, which is nature. We are part of nature, not separate from it. The solution starts with understanding and accepting a simple truth. Our economies are embedded with nature, not external to it. So it is therefore very encouraging to see initiatives like the Rimba Collective being established through a multi-stakeholder platform by building a community of purpose, development of a shared agenda, strengthening the enabling environment for conservation, and catalyzing leadership among governments, private sectors, civil society, and communities to mobilize collective action that advances conservation through innovative financing approach. Conservation and restoration can no longer be financed through just corporate social responsibility, sustainability, or just communication budget. The Rimba Collective creates this mechanism for doing this equitably, sharing those responsibility among stakeholders that enable long-term market and performance-based support. We know that achieving these shared goals is possible. Over the last few years, valuable progress has been made. Collaboration has been at the center of many of these initiatives, but this is taking collaboration to a different level. We all know that agriculture provides livelihoods to millions of producers, supports food security, and underpins international trade and global value change. However, agriculture commodities can also be a major driver of deforestation, which increases global greenhouse gas emissions and reduces resilience to climate change. If we are to address the driver of deforestation, we need to unlock the opportunities that support economic development, trade, sustainable land use, and conservation at the same time. Government leadership and policies have contributed to declining deforestation. Corporation has continuously strengthening their transformation into their sustainability journey, and civil society organization also continues to play a significant role in supporting various programs on the grounds, generating evidence-based that feed into policy making. This should be strengthened and continued. TFA as a global partnership platform initiated to support the implementation of commitments to reduce the tropical deforestation associated with the sourcing of commodities. We are hosted by the World Economic Forum. We now have over 170 alliance partners, including companies, governments, civil societies, indigenous and local communities, as well as many international organizations. The private sector has made good progress in raising awareness and also addressing commodity-driven deforestation, but there are still lots to do, and the issue remains complex and polarizing. There are over 500 leading consumer goods and other supply chain companies that have made some sort of voluntary commitments to address commodity-driven deforestation, including the Consumer Goods Forums, as well as the 2014 New York Declaration on Forests. This can only be achieved through multi-stakeholder collaboration and the mobilization of collective action across geographies, sectors, and stakeholders, both within and beyond the supply chain. Recognizing the complexities of deforestation, we continuously work to encourage collective action at the landscape or jurisdiction, national as well as the global level to meet this goal. The Rimba Collective is about scale of impact as explained by the participants. It is also built for all parts of the supply chain, allowing for cooperation to achieve a collective impact, where individual effort would likely be insufficient to make this big difference. The key conclusion is tackling deforestation requires more integrated approaches and collective action. Constructive engagement and support from the rest of the private sector, as well as civil societies and governments, are crucial components that will ensure the viability and enduring the success of this kind of initiative. So this is an exciting opportunity and yet innovative approach to advance conservation and collective action. So congratulations and thank you. Back to you, Michael.
Thank you, Pak Rizal, for your thoughts and your very positive encouragement to our work. And I absolutely agree with you that, you know, we built this into the name, the idea of a collective. And as I mentioned, and I really want to stress that as one of my sort of final, but probably one of the most important thoughts, is that, you know, we started this coming together with organizations and companies that are thinking about how do we push, how do we progress, how do we do things differently, and how do we make a greater amount of impact. And so, you know, if you are a part of that, then we really want you to come and talk to us, to sort of join us and help us build this, help us make it better, help us make it more important. Now, of course, we're inviting other corporate partners to come and join us on this journey. I really encourage also other companies, no matter what commodity that you're interested in, to come and help us actually to work towards that nature positive supply chain goal that is looking proactively into the future. So as we've come to the end of the session, you know, I really just want to thank all of you, the distinguished guests, the panelists, the partners, of course, for joining us today remotely. It's amazing to see the attendance of this webinar. And I hope that as the year progresses, we will communicate with you also about our own progress, but we hope that more of you will also be with us at the next stages of this. So have a good rest of the day wherever you are, and I look forward to being in touch soon.